All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
It's Friday, so we've got Wheel of Time, Gathering Storm. We're on chapter 29. I don't know how far you wanted to get. Like I said, don't let me bog us down in my
Yeah,
notes because I do have a lot, and we've got a lot of comments to get through, so we probably start with those. Uh,
well, I was hoping we would get through chapter 33 because that gets us through a big chunk where, except for a brief tangent with Gawain, this is really all Rand's storyline, and then chapter 34 is back to Matt. Um, so we'll see how far we go and what your notes are.
well,
Um,
it'll be a little front heavy on that because I think the theme of what it's about goes through all
mhm,
those chapters. So,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and I'll try not to go down a tangent on the first chapter that I was gonna do, and then I decided, we'll save it for later.
Well, hopefully, I don't throw
Um,
you into that tangent.
uh, so do you want to start with comments first?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get through those
We had a
first.
lot.
Unless we have a spoiler in there, uh, we'll keep going. The first one, you can't start climbing until you've hit bottom. Rand. This I think is kind of a trope, which is I think only true because of survivorship bias. We tend to celebrate the people who come back from rock bottom, but we lose sight of the people who were starting to
Oh,
slide
exactly.
and realized it
And,
and
and
got it back on
you hear
track before
that.
it got too bad.
Uh, I've referenced before, but Dave Landau, he's got his own he's got his own channel, and then also Normal World is a sketch show slash make fun of the news show that he does, and I appreciate his dark brand of comedy, and part of where that dark brand of comedy comes from is he was a full blown alcoholic by the time he was like 15 or 16.
Hmm.
And in listening to him, he did a while back, he was on Glenn Beck's podcast, who is also a former alcoholic. And so that was a lot of what they talked about was recovery. And so Landau talks about that of, you know, in that world of drugs and alcohol, it's not like he was the only one of his friends using, and not all of them made it out like he did,
Hmm.
right? And in listening to people who who have gone through recovery talk, something I've noticed that I don't know that I've ever heard anyone talk about, point out and talk about specifically, is there's actually a bottom under rock bottom because you hit what you think is rock bottom, which is this recognition that, oh, I have a problem. But that's just the first step. Then from the people I've listened to, you don't actually do anything once you realized you have a problem. You actually keep going. There has to be some sort of inciting moment, another inciting moment. The first inciting moment is, oh, I have a problem. The second inciting moment is, if I don't do something about it, I'm going to, I think Gary at Nerdrotic, his was, I literally almost died. I think Landau's, his first was, oh, this isn't juvie anymore. I'm going to real jail if I don't do something here. I
Yeah,
think was,
that's the same as like Jelly Roll's story, where he was like he was put in real jail at 15 and he kind of got used to it. And then he was getting, I guess, the good kind of visitations, and she got pregnant. And he realized I got to get unused to this.
hmm,
And so that's where he had his turnaround. Michael Easter, the author of Comfort Crisis, he begins the book with his realization moment. And he was basically sort of rock bottom, just waking up next to an empty bottle again and
mhm,
not feeling well and not being able to do his job. And he just up and quit. And he talked about, well, there's the thoughts that go through your head, like when you're in your social circles. What am I going to say to people? What am I going to do? How am I going to act? And he said the answer was easy. The answer, all I had to say was no, thank you, or I'll have some water, please. You don't think about that when you're in it. You only think about that once you're out of it. Now, I will say from personal experience, the you think you're at rock bottom when you have that epiphany, but once you get through that epiphany, you actually get to rock bottom when you feel good to not, or you feel bad to not be doing the bad thing. when you feel
Hmm.
normal when you're doing the bad thing. And then doing the right thing is when you start to feel
That this is actually, we're touching on my main notes for Rand personally, Rand as the character, because there are some moments of that here in these chapters, some moments to show you one, how dark he's gotten, but then there are a few, there are those hints there of he isn't completely gone. There is still that kernel of him there, and that slight glimmer of recognition that this this isn't as great as I'm saying it is, as I'm telling other people and telling myself. You know,
Mhm.
there is this slight recognition, not a full epiphany yet, but this slight recognition that will eventually lead him to the realization that I'm lying to myself.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll move on from that. Uh I've got thoughts on Rand with that, and there's also another comment in here that's similar to it too. So we'll get to those. The other Riverfolk character name was Deagle, possibly Schmiegel's brother or a relative. Yeah, I would
Yeah,
assume a
I remember
relative
that
with the
now.
same name. Yeah. There's an old adage that says vengeance is a dish best served cold. Yeah, and that's I got a really big thing to kind of talk about with Rand and where I think Sanderson got it wrong. Because, yes, that's where we're supposed to be right now. And I'm going to bring serial killers into this when we get to that spot.
Uh,
So yes, your comment is valid. And I think this is where Sanderson fumbled or is fumbling. And because I think Jordan gets people better than Sanderson does. Sanderson knows how to tell a story, but he doesn't
mhm.
know how to get in the mind of the characters as well as Jordan did.
I'm gonna jump up a couple of comments here because I think a there's a parallel here that jumped out at me that made me think, oh, this random Godwin chapter isn't a tangent. I think this is Godwin and Rand are supposed to be a parallel, and you see that with Godwin's hatred of Rand and his inability to let that go. Godwin is extremely selfish. He never learned his mother's wisdom that those with power must use it to serve others. Instead, he is only concerned with himself. Even though my editorial comment here, he keeps telling himself that it's all about service because he keeps telling himself, you know, I have to do this so that I can go and be the first prince to Elaine because that's where my duty is. Um, Everybody else in his family learned it, but he's dumber than a box of rocks about learning anything outside his wants and needs.
Well,
It's not that exactly. It's that he has blinded himself with emotion. That
well,
because he keeps acting on emotion,
Godwin is a perfect example of a midwit. He is intelligent, but he never takes that step to actual wisdom.
that's a great point. Yes,
Yeah.
that is one of my notes on that chapter, and where it ties in with the vengeance part of it is this is where Rand is right, even though he's wrong in how he's doing it. The point of that saying is you're not you're going to mess up if you do it emotionally because when you're enacting vengeance it's because you have been greatly wronged, and so your instinct is going to be to rage. You're going to make mistakes if you're acting emotionally. You serve it cold so that you can be calculating and do it right, do it properly. Gawain can't do that.
Yeah, but I'm gonna. Well, he can. He just will go down the other side of the slippery slope, which is what I said about serial killers. So we'll get there.
Mm,
Let's see. I've never cared much for Cadsuane. She reminds me of the school teacher that punishes you for something that somebody else did. Yes, and this is Cadsuane's weakness. We'll get to this in her chapter.
mhm, mhm.
Is she makes a lot of mistakes because she's still a victim to her own observation.
Yeah. Well, and it's why the last couple of chapters are so good. One of the reasons they're so good is because you get basically new and improved Cadsuane is how I think you're supposed to view Nynaeve at the end of the series is is I think Jordan was kind of using Nynaeve to show us how where Cadsuane started and how she became a living legend and kind of give us a hint, give us a clue of where Nynaeve is going to end up when she gets that you know, she already has a great degree of lowercase wisdom from being capital wisdom. so she already has a fair amount of wisdom. She is wiser than her years. Um, but so how much more will she have when she's lived a couple of centuries,
Hmm.
right? So I think in a lot of ways she's a new Cadsuane, and by her actions in these couple of chapters, from her point of view, Jordan slash Sanderson is showing us that rather than telling us that.
Yeah, and you brought up Nynaeve. This is the difference between age and experience. She has a lot of experience due to her age. Nynaeve has a lot of experience due to the circumstances.
Hmm.
And so they're kind of at the same place, even though there's a massive age difference. So they got to the same place differently. So they have different skill sets with the same kind of end point. Uh, at this point in the story, Rand is iron. We've already seen Stone Rand. Soon Rand will go
Hmm.
to something harder. This is where I really wanted to go into in
Yeah.
the point of view, because we've seen other, we're using iron and stone and all these things, but we've seen other Rands as well, and there's a progression to it, and it's something that we deal with in real life and can go very wrong.
Yeah.
Uh, Contrast Brian's camp with the White Cloak camp, all order with no freedom to improvise or adapt.
Yeah, I'm annoyed that I didn't think of that when we were talking about it, but that's a great point. I think way back to the beginning of the series and how easy it was for Nynaeve. Yeah, she has some woodcraft because her father, you stupid series with your stupidness, her father taught her these things, and that's a integral part of her character. But it was also because they were so blindly, literally blind. They literally blinded themselves with their order. Cut off your nose to spite your face, kind of made live.
Nobody except Morgase and possibly Talonvor actually believe whatever they've heard about Robin. Even Elaine, who deep down knows better, acts like Rand removed Morgase from Camelin. That's a little nuanced of an argument. Gawain is guilty, knows he's guilty of making bad choices, especially about Elida's coup. Rather than admit he was wrong, even to himself, he doubles down on being wrong. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that last one is true, but I think with Elaine, I think her anger towards Rand, or her animosity that's under the surface towards Rand, isn't about her mother. It's about his lack of understanding of the process and the fact that he had Aiel there creating order and
Hmm.
all of these things that made it harder for her to come back into it, which is true, but still short-sighted because she wasn't there.
Hmm.
And this is typical, let me get us canceled, typical woman come in after the fact and then get
Hmm.
mad at man for doing it differently. Uh,
Which is why the very end of what we're going to talk about today is so great because Rand just destroys that Overton window, and it's an incredible scene. It's an incredible, it's one of the even when you say, and we've kind of talked about this before, but like even for a book series that's practically perfect, why even bother putting it on the screen? Well, because as great as it is in your imagination, there are these moments like the awesome Nynaeve moment that I love at the end of Knife of Dreams. And then this moment here in the dark where Rand is talking to Nynaeve at the end of chapter 33. And man, if you had an incredible actor to pull that off, that soliloquy he gives would be incredible to see made real.
well, which is funny because you brought up a movie that had the Stradowski or whatever his name is. What movie was that you said you watched? You said it had Rand in it.
Oh, Gran Turismo.
Grant, okay, so
Yeah,
you said he
yeah.
was actually good in that,
Because
and
he's a pretentious prick.
yeah, but I memed it. Remember, because I said he was
Yes,
good when he was
yeah,
opposite O'Keefe in the
yeah. That's
in
right.
those
That's
scenes,
right.
and I memed that. We have the potential to be so great, and then he says, "Yeah, but Maureen won't let me" in the
Yeah,
meme, and
yeah.
it's the showrunners, it's the directors. The only actor that I still think is actually just horrible is the one who's playing Perrin.
Yeah, he is really hard to see anywhere else doing something good. And I haven't seen him in anything, but he's he's so bad, even with even giving the grace of the directors don't seem to be that good, and the writing is butt crap awful. It's still hard to see any
So I guess our homework
worth there.
before we get back to the show series is to watch the episodes and take note of the director of those scenes that I talked
Hmm.
about too,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
O'Keefe was the best actress or one of the better actresses, alongside Leandrin, whatever her name is. O'Keefe was Celine, if for those that haven't watched the series. But yeah, they played off each other well, and Rand was actually a good actor. But then we have other scenes, especially the first season, where it was
Yeah.
like, oh, I can't get behind this guy. He's not convincing me
It, it,
of
it,
Rand.
in that first season, all of the kids, I think I said at the time, it was like watching a CW show,
Hmm.
especially the end there where they were trying to have that forced argument where they're all yelling at each other. I was like, oh, geez, I do not see this person growing up to become the Rand that is the Dragon Reborn, that is the Emperor of the world, basically. Oh boy. Anyway, moving on.
Avienda is the archetypal maiden. Her thoughts, her actions are still dedicated by thinking she's a maiden. This is the basis of why the lessons of
Hmm.
the wise ones corrections doesn't sink in. But I will say there's always two sides to it. This is also why, just like her mentor Amos is one of the highest ranking ones, she is destined for success.
Yes. It's also, I'm going to actually uh, go off on a little mini rant here because this is one of my kind of meta notes for chapter 29, which is Rand the Fisher King. Rand having embraced the darkness and the land around him, the world around him is warping because of the darkness. Um, for anyone who doesn't know, the Fisher King is a is actually kind of all over. I went down a rabbit hole of where this motif comes from, and who knows. But in Arthurian legend, he is the last in a line of kings who was set to guard the Grail. And because he is crippled, his land is also crippled. His land is dying because the king, cannot fulfill his literally cannot because he has this grievous wound that all he can do is sit and fish um because he's so grievously wounded, and that is Rand psychologically now is the Fisher King. And this is illustrating something that I think maybe doesn't get as much attention because we've talked before about how I feel Avienda was a bit of a wasted character. There's a lot of potential there that we should have gotten more of,
Yeah, especially book
but
four version of her was pretty good.
and you see because of that stubbornness, I talked a little bit about this last time of why did it take men to come to you, because of that stubbornness all the way back into book four, and her um stubbornly clinging to her dislike of Rand, she failed him and thus she failed her people because one of the men, it's not all her fault, but one of the reasons Rand becomes who he is right now is because he didn't have Avienda to lean on. He didn't have Avienda to guide him in the way that she could have if she hadn't been so stubbornly the maiden, even
Well,
though she wasn't
and we
anymore.
throw around the word with Rand crazy. What better way to drive a man crazy than unrequited love?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And her refusal to show it, except for one passionate night after almost dying.
And then
It,
afterwards, her not only refusal to short, her refusal to acknowledge it at all. It's like it never happened, but it did happen, and I have a pornographic memory. I'm not going to forget that because
yeah,
I'm a
well, and
guy.
even crazier, she's willing to acknowledge it with her first sister,
Yeah.
but not with the person she was a lover with.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Even
Um.
after they were made first sisters, which means that anything kind of goes now for Avienda.
Mhm. But I will get to it more later when she actually kind of turns around and comes back to Rand. But she's still less frustrating than Elaine because Elaine has all of these failures, and our big gripe about her is she never really learns her lesson. She gets taught a lesson plenty of times. She never actually learns it.
Yeah, and
Avienda, to her credit, learns it.
for our fan who is frustrated at the different cultures you have to learn, that's kind of the basic for the basis for the book is actually the lack of communication cross culture,
Hmm.
cross sex, cross just friends, cross everything
Uh-huh.
is one of the major problems. And communication is key
Yeah.
in especially in this scope of humanity. And nobody does it well in these books, except
Yeah.
for maybe Tom. And
Yes. Yes.
oh, and those are your glue characters, the ones who communicate well
That's a
are
good point.
are the glue characters. Your frustration with Cadsuane, she actually does communicate things between the Aes Sedai and Rand better than any of the others had. Nynaeve
Mm-hmm.
is a hub character as well. Uh, Tom is a great example. Noel, no spoiler alert to who he really is. He communicates things
Mm-hmm.
between characters and between generations. So, next comment. I really don't like Sanderson's writing to this point where I won't read his own works. Okay. It seems to me that I can clearly distinguish what Jordan wrote, what Sanderson wrote based on Jordan's notes, and what Sanderson writes to fill in the blank areas. Yeah, we're going to get to some of that here
Yeah.
soon. On reread to tend to skim past the Sanderson parts. He doesn't have the Jordan's way with words. I will add to that, he doesn't have Jordan's way of understanding people.
Mm-hmm.
The things he lacks, he says lacks the gravity of RJ's writing, which is part of that. Yeah. Some people don't see the beauty of Jordan's way with language. It was Jordan's prose that first caught my attention beginning in chapter one, book one, not the plot, not the culture building, not the things that so many like or dislike about Watt, not even the prologue, but chapter one, the feeling of the forest, the brilliant. Yes. Okay. So let me talk about my personal experience. I was very, very, very young when I found that book on the side of
And
the
very
road.
confused because it was book three.
But it was book three. But at the same time, he wrote in a way. What was I think I was 12, 11, 12. He wrote in a way that this complex world and politics. Book three, remember, we're already getting into the politics of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And I still understood it because of the way he wrote, not because I'm smart. I'm probably smarter by
Mm-hmm.
reading what he wrote than by not. So he was able to create this world that even an 11-year-old could understand, but us 40 something year old guys are still into. And that's the difference. If I had started with
Yeah.
a Sanderson book, I would have been like, okay,
Eh,
guy did this, girl did that. Okay, whatever.
Scott just perfectly encapsulated why I rank him as one of the best authors of all time, period, because it's not just this or that or this or it's all of it together. I love good prose. I love, because I love to write myself, so I'm in awe of um people who can really capture the imagination with the written word and really paint you a vivid picture. And there's a beauty to a well crafted bit of prose. But I have read books that were I don't know how to describe them other than beautifully written. The prose was magnificent. And I couldn't tell you anything about them because they didn't have a plot. They didn't have that structure that compels you. Game of Thrones is a great example of this. Yes, that first season got everyone talking because there was so much blood and guts and boobs and bush, and it was glorious. But it wouldn't have stuck. It wouldn't have kept the audience, not just kept the audience, but grown the audience if within all of that wasn't an incredibly compelling story with incredibly well written characters that were perfectly acted, right?
Well, I'll give a different example of that. Educational work. I've got up behind me Behave. I think I do. Yeah, Behave by Sapolsky. The way the man writes about neuroscience and behavioral biology, it's the same material. It's the parts of the brain. What is responsible for what? The pathways of the
Mm-hmm.
hormones. It's the nervous system pathways. It's how they react to the environment. It's the same as any neuroscience book, but you read it like an adventure. And anybody who's listened to him talk, I think I've played a few things. The way he talks, listen to his Stanford lectures. You go through a whole semester of lectures on Stanford for free, by the way. You can do that on YouTube. And it's like you're listening to a story the way he talks. And that's why he's so popular.
Hmm.
It's not just because he's at Stanford. It's not just because he's a neuroscientist who's written books. It's because he's the best at it.
Hmm.
Robert Jordan, like you said, chapter one gets you hooked because you're looking over your own shoulder for the guy who keeps disappearing when you try to look at him.
Well, go before. I think we talked about this in our very first episode. I was utterly and completely confused when I read the prologue, as you should be.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it's compelling. And yet you can't stop reading it. And yet as soon as you're done, you have no clue what the F just happened and why it happened. You want to keep reading.
And where if Sanderson had written it, it would have been like, and he looked back and there was a guy on a horse. That's pretty much the depth you get, except when he goes on his little tangents that don't make any sense. But
Hmm. Hmm.
let's get to the last one so we can get into the actual writing. I'm not convinced the dreaming or wolf dream actually works in Finland, despite the ethereal quality of Finland. It seems not
Hmm.
to be okay. So I will say, with the way everything turns out, that statement is absolutely 100% correct, which is why I saw the disconnect with Isam going to the Tower of Genji and then disappearing.
Yeah, that always confused me. And on later rereads, after we learned a little more about the tower and the elfin and the Ilfin, I think what happened there was he jumped to the tower and it was a red herring. It was a bait to Perrin. And that he jumped to the tower and then he just exited the dream. And since Perrin doesn't know enough about the wolf dream, he didn't recognize that that's what happened.
But then
I
there's
I
the
think
interaction with Hopper right afterwards, where Hopper's like, "Get away from that thing,"
exactly.
which implies that it exists there to at least some degree, and it's dangerous.
Yes. And that's why I think Slayer did that is I think he was trying to bait Perrin into trying to enter the tower. Because if I recall that scene correctly, when Brigitte shows up, she tells him that it's almost certain death if you enter the tower in the real world, and it's certain death if you enter it here. Is basically what I recall her saying.
Which, from a foreshadowing standpoint, would have led to what we were talking about: Perrin entering from one direction and Matt, and
Yeah.
because then you could have had your three with Tom, Matt, and Noel, the three, but then the third was cheating, or the fourth
I
was cheating.
yes. I oh, I never thought about that. That's awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting way to break the rules. But to Scott's point, the fact that it's there in the dream is an oddity to me because I don't think they somehow exist outside. I think they are in his physics brain. I think this is an alternate dimension.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how they're able to read the pattern is because they're on the outside looking in, which then makes you wonder, then why is the tower there? I know it's there in the real world, so it's a reflection, but then how is it there? Why is there? What would actually happen if you went into it? If you somehow gained entry from the world of dreams, what would that mean? And it makes me wonder if it's not because you're not protected by the treaty or whatever, and the reason it's certain death is because you like cease to exist because you've gone into a place from a place. You've basically broken the laws of physics and
So
negated your
okay,
own
so we
existence.
stick to what with the real world versus the wolf dream. The wolves actually exists in the dream, but they have an avatar in the real world. And if they die in the dream, they're dead.
Hmm.
So if you enter the tower in the real world, your avatar is entering the tower.
Hmm.
But if you
Hmm.
enter in the dream, you're dead.
Hmm. Could be. It's something I hadn't thought of before. So it, this is why we do this and why we love this series. Is here's a brand new thought experiment that after
And unfortunately
how
for
old
this
am I
one,
at?
this is one we can't even get in theory land or
A-
ask Jordan about. Yeah.
after almost 26 years of reading and thinking about this series, there's still stuff that makes me go, huh. Never thought of that. Never considered that. Here, that's interesting. All
Well,
right.
I'll get my Ouija board out later, and I'll ask Robert. We're on speaking terms now.
Oh,
Just
goody.
yeah.
Okay, so chapter 29. Okay. Um,
I got notes right off the bat, so you start us off.
well, I do too. So after the meta Fisher King and Avienda thing, so right at the beginning on page 444, I find this interesting that um a couple of things here, and I wonder how connected these lines are. At the top of page 444, he has this thought about uh um so finding Grendel. If he found her, perhaps that would assuage his conscience and invading. Did he have one of those anymore? He could not decide. And that jumped out to me as interesting. And then right afterwards, so he's going through the list of the women dead at his hand. Oddly, Luz Theron started to chant with him, reading off the names, a strange echoing chant inside his head. And this is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, the kind of negative feedback loop that Luz Theron is creating because it is him. And so you're tapping into a part of you that is you doubly so, which is what is Luz Theron's madness? What has he been mad about from the very beginning? Ilyena. He killed his love. He killed all of his kin. He is Luz Theron Kinslayer now, not Luz Theron Telamon. And so it's interesting to me that Luz Theron is lucid in this, one, and two, that he actually is speaking because he has, from what little we have seen of Rand since he touched the true power, Luz Theron's been fairly subdued. And yet this brings him out, which I found interesting.
My problem with the list is super incomplete and contradicting. It is what he's not adding to the list is all the bad decisions he's made because of the list, which have resulted
Mm.
in war, starvation, crime, countless, probably at this point in the books, millions of females dead because of all of those other things that he's made bad decisions on because of his holding on to these that I could see in front of me tangibly women that I've affected.
There's a thought, and it's his his binary thinking is because of um my next note here on the next page. He's thinking, and he thinks each name on Rand's list pained him, but uh but it strengthens him, it hardens him. Um and one of the thought I had here that jumped out at me was the difference between embracing the pain and whipping yourself with the pain, being masochistic, using the pain, and what you just said, using the pain, he's using it as a crutch. And we've touched on this before, way back when we were talking about uh, uh, physiology and psychology and kind of their merging, which is something I have to be conscious of, and is a problem is um when you live with chronic pain, it's a two-stage problem. The most obvious one is your body adapting to that pain, and that's not good because your body is physically warping around the pain because it has to. But then you can get psychologically used to the pain, so much so that not and not just the obvious there is that it drags you down, but there's a less obvious, which is it's become part of your identity, which means you could actually resist fixing it because you're so used to it. Who am I without this thing? This is part of me.
Well, I'll give a more obvious example. That's like a deep, deep, deep version. More obvious example is I hurt my foot, so now I'm limping.
Mm,
So I'm limping. So this is his list. The list is his limp to the people he knows he's cost himself. It's the known pain. It's the known injury. So the limp is to defend himself internally from the injury that's there. But when you limp long enough, you destroy your entire body because that limping pattern, we don't limp normally for a reason because there is a proper way to walk. There's a proper way to move in this space that we all live in that is gravity. And if you limp for long enough, the rest of your body suffers. So he's limping his way because he has known pains. But everything else in the world is suffering because of his known pains.
hmm
Whereas if you have an injury, a limp can get you through the day, but you have to find a way to walk as normally as possible,
hmm
or else you will suffer later in a greater degree.
Uh, so the other part of that passage there, each name on Rand's list pained him, but that pain was a strange, distant thing now. His feelings were different since the day he had killed Simirhaj. She had taught him how to bury his guilt and his hurt. This is your wheelhouse, but again, I think it's worth pointing out it's not guilt, it's his shame. He's constantly shaming himself, and he isn't trying to bury the
No,
guilt, he's trying to bury the shame.
This is internal because nobody's imposing this on him. So it is guilt. This is where guilt goes bad. Guilt can be good, but this is where guilt goes bad is he is letting it dominate his feelings. Now, this is where I think it gets confusing is because Sanderson is fumbling this. This is what I was talking about where Sanderson's fumbling
Mm.
internal feelings is oh, let's get a little further before I really dive into that because it gets even better on that. But
Okay, well, get further then. Where's your notes going on this?
well, my next one is on he's postulating his use of the true power
Mm-hmm.
and how he thinks it might be making events more violent.
Mm-hmm.
There's ceasing to be the counterbalance. The balance is shifting where there's only bad that follows
Yeah.
him now.
So that's on page 450 where there's
Mhm.
this incident, this freak accident, which he's used to. But to me, this is confirmation of something I was postulating last time, which um, is he actually warping the pattern around him? And I think this is confirmation that, yeah, because of the darkness, he is distorting the balance. That this is the pattern warping, that he is now becoming basically a nexus for these bubbles of evil instead of the nexus for the wildness. The tails of the bell curve is basically what he had become as a Tavarin, is he had become a nexus for tails of the bell curve. For most people, most of the time, the pattern is operating like this, but around him, you're seeing all the exceptions to the rules.
Well,
At least
before he
until
was
now.
Newtonian,
Mm-hmm.
before he was Newtonian, where it was like a seesaw. One would go up, the other would go down, then it would switch, and then it would switch, and then it would switch, and then it would switch. But then as he's going more towards that, we'll just use the word darkness as uh as the metaphor, even though darkness is just a lack of light. But uh
Well, no, I think that's important because that is actually one of my points that I wanted to make here is that it's called the dark because it's easy for our brains to wrap around, but what it really is the never-ending story, which I was teasing my children about because this is why Gen Xers are harder than you kids because of Atreyu and the swamp. But the
yeah,
nothing,
we've been through it. We've been through
it
it.
was such a cheesy movie, but yet as a
Speaking of
as an
which,
Aesop's fable kind of thing.
listen to Evanescence, their big hit. Save me from the nothing
It,
I've
it, it,
become. Yeah.
exactly. That's why the dark is dangerous because it's not the dark of night. It's the nothingness of a vacuum.
Hmm.
It is the vacuum of space. It is the expanse. It
Well,
is
as
nothingness.
Jordan being a physicist, it's entropy of the universe.
Yes.
So the balance, we actually live in an unbalanced universe as beings on this earth, we make order out of chaos, but we actually do it poorly because we still have more waste than we do. So you eat, you create heat. Heat is waste. Heat is entropy. What's best at it is plants. Plants are great at it. They take chaos and make it order. And then we eat the plant, or the animal eats the plants, and we eat the animal.
Because steak
And
is delicious.
and because steak is delicious, and then we fart, and it's entropy. It's uh. So there is an edge to that, and this is the where Newtonian physics becomes thermodynamics, right? So he's shifting towards there's more bad than good. And what we can't lose sight of in the state of that's the reality, but we can't lose sight of is kind of Steven Pinker's work. Look at all the good things that still exist, though. Look at all the things we do that have improved, and he's lost sight of that at this point. It's metaphorically written
Hmm.
that it's just happening around him more often, but as human beings, we have a negativity bias,
Yeah.
and we lose sight of the good things that happen in lieu of the things that are scary.
It's why stories like this stick with you, and why these themes, why the hero's journey and the different spins on it have been popular for millennia. For whenever we first learned to make fire and tell stories around it, because no matter um, no matter who you are, you can find some kernel in your own life within stories like this, if they are written well, if they are written by someone who has a good intuitive grasp of human nature. Speaking of human nature, do you have any more notes or thoughts on this chapter?
Human Nature 450. He he looks back on the drilling into the bore,
Yeah.
and it's the search for just ever more power and ever more
Hmm.
power and ever more
Hmm.
power. When they were realistically living in as close to a utopia as you
Yep.
can have, but humanity just wasn't happy. And then you add a little outside influence because I think Issue had some of his nihilistic nudgings to want to end it all, to kind of nudge Lanfear and the others that were responsible for drilling the bore. Uh, but I think it's kind of a metaphor for that. Like I looked up the origins of the lizard brain, the lizard man living at the top. It was because there's just never enough power. There's
Mm.
just never enough, and so it just keeps going further and further and further till you implode on yourself and you die.
Uh, all right. So my last thought on this chapter.
I
Yeah, go
got I
ahead.
got I have one more note. Mine's on Avienda. His thoughts on Avienda, anyways.
Oh, about where the heck is she and why is she in the waste?
Why is she in the waste? But also he's comforting himself. And one of the statements he makes in his head is his enemies didn't know of her yet. So she's safe. But earlier in the same chapter, he says he's postulating, he's talking about, well, is Lanfear back? Because Ishi's back. And he doesn't know about Halima and Asengar, but they were back. And he kind of
You
feels that
know,
too. And he's
yeah.
asking himself, is Lanfear back? Well, when he has that thought later, his enemies don't know of her yet. I'm like, Lanfear does. That's why she went crazy. That's
But
why she exposed herself.
to your point, this is the problem he is creating for himself with this rigid binary thinking of his, that he's not able to step back and look and see the different options, see the different, okay, but yes, this thing happened, but also these things, you know, what about this? What about that? Here's more good, here's more bad. He can't let himself think like Min is trying to teach him of, she's the one talking about balance, she's the one trying to make him see the good side, but because he has put himself in such a rigid binary cage of, you know look at all the bad I did, and using this failure to protect women as the avatar of this mode of thinking. It's okay, she's safe. No, I'm done. She's safe. The enemy doesn't know about him. And so his brain can't connect the 2 points he just made.
Yeah, which is funny because I'm going to get meta here. His obsession with order.
Hmm.
Yes, entropy of the universe is one thing, but it's so minute in our lifetime that you'll never notice. Uh, his obsession with order involves take, take, take from the earth,
Hmm.
when the normal life cycle involves give,
Well,
take, take and give. The plant takes the sunlight and the carbon from the air and creates a carbohydrate. The the cow takes the carbohydrate and through its seven stomachs, which we don't have, so this is why vegetarianism sucks. Uh, they create proteins from the vegetation. We eat the proteins, create our bodies from those proteins and fats. And then we release entropy into the world, which reuses it. There's the give. So we have, you're talking about balance, order and entropy. They're both necessary. And he's obsessed with order. And so when you're obsessed with order, it's like holding a fart in too long. It starts to hurt and hurt and hurt. And then it comes out at the worst time and everybody suffers.
You most of all if it's a shark.
Oh, no, everybody still suffers.
Uh,
That's gonna smell worse. But yeah, no, no. I mean, it's a crude example, but it's a correct example.
all right. So trying to segue from the crude example to some
Well, if we're gonna go into Godwin, I gotta pee.
no my last thought here
Okay.
is is a little bit of a backup, but so back on page 446, I found this really interesting, and I'm wondering, to Scott's point, how much of you think this is Sanderson, how much you think this is RJ Scott. But Luce Theron had one more name to add after Rand had finished the list. But Luce Theron had one more to add. Elmendrada Farshaw, he whispered. Rand pulled Tidashar up short, stopping his column of Aiel, suddenly uncovering camp attendants in the middle of the street. Dobering turned back questioningly on his white stallion. I did not kill her, Rand thought. Luce Theron, she lives on. We didn't kill her. That was Simirhaj who was to blame in any case. Silence. Is this the old married man part of Rand who knows more, knows better? Yeah, you did. She's not dead, but you killed her. And I think this connects to where we're going to end, jumping forward to the end of chapter 33 when Nynaeve is watching him and he's talking to Nynaeve and you can just feel the nihilism growing inside of him. And one of the things that Nynaeve takes note of that she would take note of is that, paraphrasing here, he looks down on Min who's sleeping, and Nynaeve thinks those eyes used to hold affection every time he looked at Min, and now there's just nothingness.
We
You
have a
killed her.
phrase. We have a
Yeah.
phrase in modern humanity. You're dead to me.
Yeah. And
It,
and
it
if you
usually follows them betraying you, but he's using it in a way of just pushing her out of his life.
yes. And for Min, you may have well have just killed her
Hmm.
because that's how much she cares about you. That's why I loved that line when he's choking her, and there's that line there about looking up with those big eyes full of love as he was killing her. You know, that's how much she cares, and yet you're
And
not gonna
in,
let her in.
instead of affecting him in a way that was, I had my hands around her throat and she still loved me. Now we're past that. Safely take that in. It's the opposite. He
Hmm.
completely rebounded, and he
Yeah.
thinks he's doing the right thing, but
Yes.
he's not her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's pause there so we can rant about Gawain.
All right. We should
Oh,
be able to bang through Godwin because he's lost his depth at this point.
mhm. Well, actually, that's a good way to put it with what my notes are here, because it, and again, the more I evaluate Gawain, the more I think, yeah, he's not. supposed to be a heroic character. He's not supposed to necessarily even be a likable character because it's not about losing his depth. I think it's showing us that he was never deep.
Well, there is. Well, that's the thing. By this point, you would have been adding depth. He never.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to to that point, so a couple of notes here. When he's uh, what page am I on? So page 459, the beginning of this chapter, when he is talking to Lelaine, and he has the thought that he learned very quickly he can play them off one another. He figured out very quickly there are two camps within this camp, and Lelaine and Ramonda lead these two main factions, and he can play them off one another. So he is his mother's son. He is a a, a clever enough, well-educated individual. So he should know better. He does know better, but he can't see what that means when it comes to the big important things, the things that are most important to him. He's so blinded, he can't apply that. He's yes, to your point about midwit, is he's well educated, but he's never managed to attain any degree of wisdom, even with all the things he's been through. You look at the other characters, they're all young. All the main characters are young, and yet they all grow up very quickly. That's kind of the hallmark of one of the things that he was trying to show, and that partly comes from his background as a young enlisted Marine doing combat tours, surrounded by other young enlisted, people, 18 to 20-year-old kids who have to grow up really damn fast because of the pressure of the situation they're thrown into. Everyone else does that. Gawain never does. To that point. So he has this thought on 459. So you see he ain't no dummy, and yet over on page 461, I think it's down near the bottom. Yeah. Was he the only one who remembered that she'd been an accepted just months ago? So this is him ranting in his head about how he's the only one who knows better, that, even though he's recognizing that he assumed one of the reasons he rushed here is because, oh, Egwene is their puppet. They're just going to let her die. I have to go rescue her. He gets here and he's actually smart enough to recognize that they actually treat her, and there may even be some respect here. She's, as far as these women are concerned, she is the Amarillan. That should be enough to kind of crack his numbskullery,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. The one of my instant thoughts here was, bro, so was your sister, and look where she's at right now.
Mm-hmm.
She is a
Where
full
you should
Aes
be.
Sedai.
Yeah.
She is a full Aes Sedai, and she has secured the throne during during a conflict, during a succession crisis. She has quelled that. She has secured the throne. She's doing her duty, and she managed to get all of this done, even though, as you just thought, am I the only one who remembers just a few months ago she was an accepted? Well, just a few months ago, you were just a student to the warders, and then you killed a couple of them, and now you're leading a small army.
Yeah, including your teacher, who's supposed to be the best of the best.
Mm-hmm.
So, eh, yeah. Is there anywhere else you wanted to go with Gawain himself? Because I've got a comment on Sanderson about this chapter.
Um, I think that what I like the way Brine is trying to teach him what he needs to learn. I think it's this this chapter, I think, tells you more about him than it does Gawain, because like I said, pretty early on here, you realize, oh, this guy was a mile wide but an inch deep to begin with. Brine, this tells you more about Brine, is his ability to recognize what Gawain needs to learn and then how he's trying to teach him. Because so on 466, where they're having this back and forth, and and Galwin just is responding to his basically his childish tantrums of okay, then what? Think, damn you. Okay, you're gonna barge in and rescue Egwene no matter what she says, no matter what any of the Aes Sedai around here say. Then what? All right, you bust her out and you're gonna take her to Camelin. Okay, what if she doesn't want to go to Camelin? Hey, dummy, you just got done seeing for yourself and thinking to yourself that these women around here see her as the Emerillin. She's in charge. You're not the only one with duty and honor. She is too. Think, damn you. But he can't.
Yeah, which is funny because there's so much pushback on the Disney princess and the Prince Charming and everything. This is proper pushback.
Yes.
This would have been a great story to tell from a different angle that we could have had a whole separate movie about. And
Mm-hmm.
Disney dropped the ball because they could have had this because Jordan's notes and Sanderson wrote it for them. But yeah, this is the other side of that. It's like, well, maybe Rapunzel doesn't want to be rescued. Maybe it's
That
nice up in the tower.
that's a great point. That who was I listening to? It was I think it was the Nerdrotic guys talking about Zack Snyder on with Rogan, and Zack Snyder's obsession with a few things in particular, like uh, Batman: Return of the Dark Knight, and The Watchmen, which even those authors have said, yeah, well, yeah, those were subversions, but not everything should be that. Those graphic novels worked when they were written because not every hero had been deconstructed.
Hmm.
Well, now it's old and boring. It's not a subversion if everything is like that. The subversion of Prince Charming works here with Gawain because we actually have several Prince Charming stories in this series. You have Lan and Nynaeve. You have Rand and Elaine. Um, you have you now have we haven't seen it culminate yet, but we've seen the inklings of wait, Tom and Moraine? What? Um, Julian Sandar and his queen, what's her face? Uh, you know, you have all of these
Amathera.
Amathera.
Yeah.
You have all of these, you know, different spins, different twists on Prince Charming type stories, and so that's why Gawain stands out so much because this is a subversion and it's done right and it's done well.
Yeah. Well, Disney should take note if they want strong female characters that can also be saved by a strong male character with Tom and Moiraine. Because Tom is only in love with Moiraine because of her competency. And it's very clear.
Mm,
It's not, I need to save her because she's helpless. I need to save her because the world is wicked. And she was doing a very dangerous job.
mm-hmm.
And she succeeded. And now I need to save her from that success.
Um, I'm also curious if where this scene came from and how much Sanderson was relying on Jordan's notes because in Brian's teaching of Gawain, his attempted teaching here of Gawain, one of the things that he basically says is, um, what was it all for? What did it all mean? Especially if you're a warrior, when you get to the end of your life, you're going to want all of that pain, death, terror, the loss of friends and comrades. You're going to want it to have meant something. And I'm wondering if Jordan was kind of channeling here, you
His
know,
experience in Vietnam.
there were
Yeah.
there were those of us who were able to come back and get on with our lives, and then there were some who just couldn't. And Godwin just can't. He just can't get past the everything I did was for nothing, and it breaks him. And he's really never able to get past that. And there's echoes here of I don't remember if I've told this story or not, but um, you know, I know I've said that there's only like a couple of times I've teared up in movies, and one of them was Saving Private Ryan, and it wasn't during the movie. It was when I stood up after the lights came on and I turned around, and San Antonio is a huge military town. There are a lot of retired guys there, and there were a number of vets there, obvious vets, because they had on their little VFW or American Legion caps. And then one guy in particular whose face sticks out to me because he only had one eye and the other was covered by an eye patch, and that eye had tears streaming down it, and I lost it. Well, there was another time where a similar thing almost happened to me. It was after the fall of Afghanistan, and Glenn Beck's charity, one of the charity groups he runs, they were able to get out a bunch of people. And so they brought on these two sisters to talk about the fall of Afghanistan and what had happened, and also to surprise them with they had been able to get them into a small college and they had a scholarship for them because they had been in college. And of course, now that the Taliban had taken over, that was done.
Mm-hmm.
That was over. Well, it wasn't the girls and they teared up and all that's sweet. And all, that's not what got me. What got me is that when his head researcher, who was a former Marine, who then went on to become an Army officer in Army intelligence, and so he's the head researcher there because he's got all this background, and he did like 3 tours in Afghanistan. And when he came out, and you could tell, I mean, he could barely talk to these girls, apologizing to them. And he was hurt more than they were, and you could tell by what he said and the way he was talking, it was in large part because all of the sacrifices that he and his friends and comrades had made had ultimately turned out to be for nothing, and that just destroyed this guy. you know Big alpha manly man, and he just, I mean, he was a wreck, and that got to me. And I think, I wonder if that was purposely something RJ was trying to channel with this interaction with Gawain, ultimately, finally, kind of his wake up call ish, being meeting his old mentor, the old grizzled veteran who is telling this now young veteran, you have to find a way to make what you've done mean something, or find or move on to something that will mean something. Otherwise, it will break you.
Well, this is important because it's a positive spin on emotion. If in a survival situation, I put in a shit ton of effort and I get zero reward. So I chase the buffalo and I chase it with all
Mm-hmm.
my heart and I fail to bring it down because of my techniques. I don't eat. But not only do I not eat, I expended all of those calories to chase it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm double dead. And if that emotion doesn't cause me to change my approach, I'm dead. That's survival. That's why this is the positive. This is why emotions are positive, because that guilt, that shame, or what would be this be? Just that down feeling, that dopamine dump that you would get at the end of that, the adrenaline dump you would get at the end of that feels horrible because you never got the reward. And so you change your behavior. You put your energy in a better place. Godwin is not adapting. He is not adapting to the situation because he's not changing his behavior. So he keeps dumping the energy in and getting zero in return.
Yeah. And this is where I think this is where the kind of the parallel between Rand and Gawain jumped out at me, because really my only note for the whole next chapter is about this, is a Rand Gawain parallel. And it's because to me, the whole point of the next chapter, both the beginning where you get is from Cadsuane's point of view, and then the last chunk of the chapter is switches to Rand's point of view. And the whole theme of the chapter to me seems to be you need to be fighting for something, not against something or someone.
Well, you need to be fighting to survive. And that includes you and your people.
Yes. it is it's Patton's it's that great Patton speech. The job of a soldier isn't to die for his country, it's to make some other dumb son of a bitch die for his.
Yeah. Okay, so let me make a commentary on Sanderson real quick, and then we'll get to the next chapter because this we've already gone about an hour, and I don't want to get too bogged down because you've got a
Mm-hmm.
time limit, and the 3 hour videos get less views than the hour and a half videos. So both of those considerations
Mm-hmm.
need to play into it. Okay, so this is on Sanderson. Go to page 458 in the hardback. About 3/4 of the way down, he is it starts with she seems very confident in her safety, Lelaine says.
Mm-hmm.
Skip down to halfway through. Gawain politely didn't read over her shoulder, though he did notice the calculated move on her part. He was unimportant enough that he couldn't demand her full attention. He chose not to acknowledge the insult. So, Wheel of Time fans, let me direct you to an interview with Sanderson. This immediately popped in my head because I've mentioned it before. He's being interviewed about Wheel of Time. What is he doing as he's talking? Signing autographs. This is all his interviews. He's signing autographs during his interviews.
Huh.
Are we important enough for his full attention?
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I've got a little theory here, and I'll just kind of say it and leave it. He's an author, and what we want to say is he was so honored to get this assignment that he would actually put everything he could into it to do the best job he could because it's such an honor. Or he did some work that people really liked that were in charge of this decision, but it's not his baby.
Mm-hmm.
So it's his stepchild.
Mm-hmm.
And he put some effort into it because he doesn't want to make mom mad, but it's not his baby.
Mm-hmm.
This is the redheaded stepchild. And the way things are playing out, it's like, I wonder if this was the stepchild. It's not his.
Well, the parallels are deeper there too, because I assume his justification would be, hey, no, I care about my fans. I'm doing this for them, would be his justification for why I'm not giving this interview my full attention, because I care about my fans and I have all these autographs to sign for people who wanted signed copies of whatever the heck it is that he's signing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but
still, you should give the thing in front of you your full attention.
hmm yeah, what are you doing in the other parts of your days when you could have been signing autographs for your fans?
Oh well,
Uh,
I'm writing my works that my fans want to read.
Russell, Patrick Mahomes has lots of fans that he has to sign autographs for,
Hmm.
but he's not under center
Hmm. When it's time to
signing an auto.
practice, it's time to practice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is the degree of this is my beef with Sanderson. And that video, when I first saw one of those interviews, it kind of put me over the edge because I already had that feel about him.
Uh-huh.
Is it's he's a little bit of he's a bit of a narcissist. It's all about me. Look at
Hmm.
me. Look at the attention. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I have to deal with my fans because they want my autograph. They want me. So yeah, that he wrote it in the book. That's
Hmm.
exactly you not paying attention, and
It's a
that's
good
exactly what
catch.
he does. Yeah. Sorry, that's just a fan standpoint. Let's get on to Rand again. Because this is where I go into I don't think he got it with interpersonal relationships.
What so which chapter are you in? Because that I didn't have anything more for chapter 31. More of my Rand stuff is actually in chapter 32 and 33, which are the uh aren't actually from Rand's perspective. They're both chapters are from Nynaeve's perspective, which I love. Um
471.
mhm.
Let's see. Oh, this is Cadsuane's chapter.
Yeah.
Uh, I did. There was a little catch in here. Remember Rand's thoughts way back? I'll never trust a skinny innkeeper again. her little informant, who is a horrible innkeeper, is not described as being plump or anything. And of all the descriptive things out there, that was one that was missing. So I thought that was a good little catch. But Cadsuane later, 474, makes a super wrong assumption, and this I think is a good data point in Cadsuane's uh limitations, because she's only good up to her perception.
Mm,
And one of her limitations is she made an assumption that it was okay to keep the male Adam, because if the baddies wanted it, they would have just gone to the Shanshan for another one.
mm.
The Shanshan don't have them. This was found in the
In a
museum.
museum, yeah.
Yeah.
We
This was something here already. It's found in the
we
museum.
we purposely don't know. I mean, when Simrihaj is talking about it, there's some speculation there about where it came from, but Jordan never tells us explicitly where the heck this thing came from. It's just
It was a
assumed.
relic. It was an artifact.
It's just assumed that someone made them during the breaking to control men who were going nuts is the assumption, but
Yeah. And with this
we're
with the
not really
Shanshan,
told what.
there's no reason to even make them. Just because they had the female version, there's plenty of reason to make those, but they just killed the males.
Yeah, they just straight up kill him. We know
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we know that for a fact.
Yeah, so she made a bad assumption there. So we see, which is I like fallibility in
Hmm.
main characters. So she's a victim of her own biases, and she made a bad assumption. And then she goes into, on the next page, talking about, and this is where Sanderson kind of gets in trouble, because he keeps trying to go back and forth to make people reasonable, but then
Hmm.
make them fallible at the same time. She's thinking to herself about how actually wise the decisions he makes are. And she's like, but I need to be in control of him.
Hmm.
So she keeps bouncing back and forth in this. Where when we had Jordan, she was more like, he's trying to say it in the here, but Sanderson is trying to say it in here, but he keeps just going back and forth. Instead of Jordan's, she was very much in control of her own emotions, trying to guide him and knowing
Hmm.
the extent of it. Whereas with Sanderson, she just keeps going back and forth between making bad decisions and understanding the truth, and then making bad decisions and then understanding the truth.
That's a good catch and is more of kind of what I talked about last time or a couple times ago with Matt, and he took 5 pages to say something that could have been done in a paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
And that Jordan again, my wife was making fun of me last night when I was talking about what we were going to talk about today, is that she was laughing under her breath when we were recording last time when I was saying that Jordan was economical with his words. Because look at the size of the books and how many there are, and that there are literally millions of words of notes. The notes he took are just ludicrous. Um, but my point was, just because a movie is long doesn't mean it's going to be boring. Look at the extended versions of Lord of the Rings versus look at modern movies where even I you brought up Gran Turismo earlier. Um, Even that movie, which I liked, there were parts in it where I was getting bored and I was hitting the skip 10 seconds button, or I got up to go to the bathroom, right? You take a movie like Predator, which is no cinematic masterpiece, and yet there's no wasted motion in that movie. There's no time to get up and go take a leak without pausing it. There's no mind wandering off, even if you're rereading it or
Hmm.
rewatching it, because every scene does something that contributes to the characters in the story and thus is compelling. This Sanderson is spending several pages here, to your point, going back and forth because he doesn't exactly know how to get the point across.
Oh, and
And
then
so
he
he's
just,
shotgunning again.
and this is where we get into where I think he's really wrong with Rand as a character, because from Cadsuane's point of view, we just got a few chapters earlier when he exiles her.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that she understood that he had reached a point where it's not just anger anymore, it's something different. But we get a line here: if Althor really was as dominated by his rage as she feared, then even this would not help him.
Mm-hmm.
Rage is out of the equation here. He's not dominated by rage. Sanderson doesn't understand the progression that Jordan
It's a
was
good
going
catch.
for.
Yeah.
In book 2 and 3, Rand was a scared puppy. He was a reactionary scared puppy. And then he found his power in that sequence, and then he became angry. And he became angry with everybody, every situation. Why me? Why me? Why me?
Hmm.
So he went from running to being bitter about it. And now he's reached another level where now he's just apathetically cold about it.
Hmm.
That's what I was talking about with the psychopath. Look at someone like Edward Kemper. He was a scared little kid with an abusive mother. And then he became angry at her and he lashed out at animals and other things. And then he killed his first person that reminded him of his mother. And then it did just, he noticed there was no feeling. It this is why I said the vengeance is best served cold. There's another side of it. That first kill was his revenge against his abusive mother for the scared kid. But as an adult, he realized I didn't feel anything. And so now his revenge against his mother takes on a new form that becomes one of the worst serial killers in the history of the United States. That's the path Rand is on. He was scared, and then he was bitter and resentful and angry, and now he's cold. That's where Jordan was going.
That's a really good catch. And to your point, that's why the breaking point, I hadn't really thought of it in these terms. The breaking point wasn't really the fact that he was about to kill the woman he loved. The breaking point was what happened after, because that list of his, that was all indirect. Elza and Simmerhaj, he killed them with his own hand.
Well, he killed Leah too. He killed that
Oh,
first
that's right.
girl.
That's a good
He
point.
killed the first
That's a
girl
good
from book
point.
3 too.
That's a good point. That's
Yeah.
a good point.
No, no, it's the phrase that it's kind of distant now. It doesn't have the same kick that it used to. But again,
But
Sanderson keeps
but
going
but
back
with
and
the
forth.
first two, because he even says when he's going through the list that Leah, I told myself it was for her own good. And then with the first one, you know, I told myself she was a dark friend and I didn't have a choice. So he could rationalize this. But then he gets to this point where he kills these two women with his own hand and it's nothingness. So it is that serial killer
Hmm.
progression.
Yeah, it is revenge, but it ceases to be anger. Anger was the original motivation,
Mhm.
but then he lost the feeling that goes with it, and that's when it becomes dangerous because then it's just the thing you do. If it's about anger, you need the person to provoke the anger first. Now it's just that she's a dark friend. Okay, you're done.
Yeah. Any more thoughts on chapter 31 here before we go to 32 and
Uh,
33 and Nyneaves' point of view?
uh, okay. So I said contrast this with his thought on Nynaeve. Oh, because she's changed so much. There was
Hmm.
something there. What page was that on? I didn't. It's kind of a progression. It's over the next several pages. So it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
He has this thought as he's going through his head of who can I trust, and he thinks about Nynaeve, and I think is it when he's
Oh yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about
No, he
he's
says
mad that
she was far too free with her emotions, particularly her
uh,
temper.
mm.
And that's the contrast. Is there's a balance. Like we keep bringing
Oh
this
yeah, and
word up. There's a balance.
he thinks something along the lines of she'll never make a good or a proper Aes Sedai because she doesn't keep her emotions in check. But no, that's why she's better than they are.
And that's why he trusts her. He even says, at
Yeah.
least he always knew where he stood with her.
Hmm.
She was terrible at games and that made her valuable. He trusted her. She was one of the few. And he doesn't get that that's exactly If it was pure rage, he would be predictable.
Hmm.
But the problem with Rand now in these books is he's unpredictable because it's not pure rage.
Until she pricks his conscience there when she's talking to him, and he then he's been utterly cold since that moment with the male Adam, and now the previous Rand, the angry Rand, comes out against Nynaeve, and he even feels himself reaching towards the uh the Songrill thing, the statue, like physically reaching for it, and Nynaeve's eyes go wide in utter shock that are you is this really happening? Are you really that far gone? Um, and it's the rage comes out. I think this is a part of showing us that Rand isn't completely gone, so that when he comes back, it's not out of left field. That there is still something there because she pricks his conscience because he still has one, no matter how deeply he has buried it now. Um, I also had this.
Okay, so Nynaeve tried to talk to him. I wonder if this is where Jordan actually had some notes here, because again, I'm talking about how Sanderson doesn't get it, but this
Mhm.
line from Nynaeve is great. Perhaps after you've had a chance to think on exactly what abandoning land would mean.
Yes.
And the abandoning land is actually a signature of his lack, his ingrowing psychopathy. Is he is just a tool,
Hmm.
and the meaning of him doing it that she gets is that he would have lost his humanity, and he is in the process of losing his humanity.
Yeah, that's a very deep line because it's not just that I'm supposed to be your friend and he's my husband. It's not just that he's an important person. It's think of all the things that this man has done for you at his own expense, and you're willing to just abandon him. What does that mean? What does that, who are you if you do that? And that actually leads into my first, really my only note here on page on chapter 32, which so on page 497, she's having this, she's thinking through, okay, um, I got to do something because after what just happened there at the end of the last chapter, I've got to do something. Okay, but what? What do I do? How do I deal with that? And I had this thought here as she's going through what's wrong with Rand and how do I help him is, and it almost seems like out of left field to me, but is RJ's theme of hard versus strong a repudiation of Machiavelli? Be,
There's undertones there because the Machiavelli is the epitome of psychopathy and leadership.
mm-hmm. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the things he says, one of the reasons the church didn't like him, he got trouble with the church, is that one of his main points was um it is things like paraphrasing it is better to be feared than loved. That
Mhm.
idea comes from Machiavelli. Um, either treat your conquered foes well or utterly destroy them because someone can take revenge for a small slight, but if they are destroyed, they cannot take revenge against you. I mean, these are the hard versus strong things of, yeah, that's all true, but as we have seen through history, if you are a hard dictator, everything's fine until that moment where something finally just hits you right that you shatter.
Yeah, well,
It all falls
where
apart.
Rand is not Machiavellian is that he doesn't understand the fact that we use that in terms of the dark tetrad trait where they're
Mm-hmm.
master manipulators. And so what he doesn't get is Machiavelli was also a master of feigned benevolence. So
Mm-hmm.
he would be benevolent when it it led to the goal he wanted. All he cared about was the goal. There's the psychopathy there. All he cared about was the goal. He could be hard when it needed and kill everybody, or he could also be the best person that you ever came across if it got to the same goal. Where Rand doesn't get that. Rand,
That is a really good point, because then the specific example uh uh Nynaeve thinks about here at the bottom of page 497 is she's thinking about being a king really wasn't all that different from being mayor in the Two Rivers. The mayor needed to be respected and liked. The wisdom and the women's circle could do the difficult tasks, such as punishing those who overstepped their bounds. The mayor, however, needed to be loved. That led to a civil and safe town, which is I
we see it a little bit. Ishi's a little bit Machiavellian.
uh-huh.
Ishi doesn't care if you're feeling good or bad as long as it ends in the direction he wants to go. We see it at the end. This won't spoil anything, but Demandred gets his place of power by being Machiavellian
Mm-hmm.
because the people he rules actually
Manipulates.
love him.
Yes.
Actually love him. So it's the, the real world example is someone like Obama. He puts on this air of you even when you hate him, you kind of want to love the guy, kind of situation. So that this is where Rand is wrong, is he's only got the hard,
Yeah.
which actually is a good sign. Like you said, it's the humanity in them, because Machiavellians are they're lizard brained. They don't have that stopgap that this is bad, that what I'm doing. All
Mm-hmm.
they know is I want X result.
And I think what Nynaeve is saying, and what Sanderson is saying through Nynaeve here, is that the Machiavellian hard approach is goal to goal to goal. But what she's saying is you have to step back and look at the bigger picture, that if the mayor is loved and respected, then that leads to holistically a civil and safe and happy village, because that's going to that's going to smooth over a lot of bumps before they become, smooth over the molehills before they become mountains. I also found it interesting. I was curious what you might think about this interesting inversion. Again, another subversion of the standard that works. That the women are the disciplinarians in the Two Rivers. That is a flip flop of the way it usually works, and I found that interesting.
I don't want to take us on a too much of a tangent with a time limit, but
Yeah.
there's controlling everything disciplinarian, and then there's consequences of your action disciplinarian.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we always talk about the male being the disciplinarian in our society, but look at the way we run things. The kid is doing something that's slightly dangerous. Guys going like, "Ooh, let's get the camera. You watch this."
Much.
Where
Yeah.
mom is trying to stop them right away.
Mm-hmm.
No, look at our school systems. Sit down, shut up.
Yeah.
That's female discipline.
Zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance. Yeah. Where the men are like, okay, well, y'all two got in a fight. Well, who started it? Yeah. Okay. Well, did you learn your lesson? You got your ass kicked.
Mm-hmm.
That's male discipline. It's after the result of the action, where female discipline is to prevent the action.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think so. I think it's actually very, because it's such a tight knit community. That's what it would be like versus what we see
That's a good
nowadays,
point.
where we're sending
Yeah.
kids to school and stuff.
The tight knit community matters there.
Mhm.
So my last thought on chapter 32 here, as she's going through this thought process and then comes up with a plan and begins to execute the plan. Basically, what she's doing is she's illustrating why show versus tell works. It works in stories because it works in real life. It it is much more impactful if you show someone rather than you just tell them. So that's what she's doing. All right, I can't just tell Rand. I mean, I did. I just told Rand, "Hey, it's me. You can trust me. You trust me, right?" Okay, but that's not enough. Now I need to show him. I need to show him something so that he doesn't just say yes, but he means yes, I can trust you. So, and it just suddenly dawned on me, oh, that's why show versus tell is such a strong rule and why it works so well in storytelling, because it works so well in real life. That's really how you make your point in real life as well. All right. Um. All right. So then she executes her plan. Uh. Fun little bit of action and stuff happening as she goes through and she figures out stuff and she finds, aha, here's the guy who poisoned the messenger. And on top of that, um, I think he's got compulsion. So Rand is now all excited. Ooh, this could lead me to Grendel. But what's interesting to me right off the bat here on chapter 33, page 512, where is it? Yeah, down at the bottom of 512 is um there's kind of this feeling from the very beginning, and then you see it at the end of the chapter where Nynaeve is kind of realizing, have I just snatched defeat from the jaws of victory, or or vice versa? Because I thought I had done something tremendous here, but now that I look at Rand and really see him, I don't know that I actually got a win here. And she has this thought down at the bottom. This man almost seemed an interpretation of the Rand she'd once known, like a statue carved from rock to look like him, but exaggerated in heroic lines. And I think that I think that's a way of saying Rand is trying too hard. Rather than doing, he's now forcing. And that had been his failing for a while now, but this coldness is just making it worse because that's all he does now is impose and force.
Well, and that goes back to my comment at the beginning of this, where he's trying to create nothing but order and he's forgetting about the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting contrast here with Nynaeve because she's looking at Rand and seeing this without saying it, seeing what Rand has become. And then page 515 to 516 is when um through sheer determination and instinct, she's able to do something that she has no idea how to do, that she shouldn't be able to do, which is heal compulsion. She doesn't even know how to do compulsion, and she shouldn't. And no other Aes Sedai around probably would have any clue. Varen maybe would know how to reverse compulsion because she's smart and she knows how to do it. Shh, don't tell anyone. Um, but uh, just through sheer determination and her instinct, she's not forcing. She's not, trying to shove a square peg through a round hole. She's doing. She's feeling her way along. She's thinking through and combining that with her the instinct of healing that she's always had, and she's able to make this, yet again do another impossible thing.
Yeah, and Jordan would have been just at the beginning of the neuroscience kind of division coming across all this is your brain will find a way
Mm,
because it's organic. If you lose your eyes, your ear, I'm going to make this simple, your ears will start to connect to your visual cortex and you'll start creating pictures from sounds. Daredevil is real. Uh, it's organic. If it's organic, it's just like a wound.
mm,
If you can put the skin back together and the muscle back together and set a bone, well, that's because it's organic, and you can create the healing mechanism that brings that back. The brain does that. We know that from Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage took the iron rod through the brain, and it basically blew up his prefrontal cortex, and he lost all inhibition. He went from the deacon of his church to going to brothels and drinking incessantly because he had no impulse control. But then it slowly got better over time on its own because his brain redirected all the processes that he needed to make good decisions as a human being. Still wasn't great at it, but it got better. And this is that kind of mentality was a new idea when Jordan was first writing these. And then by the time this book came out, it was starting to become mainstream. But yeah, no, she's right. If it's organic, we can heal it. And this idea that the brain is some supernatural thing inside your body was ceasing to be the thing. And I think Nynaeve is the embodiment of that in this fiction,
Yeah. Um,
which kind of goes against the lore a little bit when you look at Rand,
what do you
because the
mean?
soul controls his thoughts as well. So if we have damage to the soul, then we would have a different result.
Well, no, I think you're getting into the um language fallacy there that we were getting around by changing it from free will. I think control's the wrong word there. Strongly influences is a better term than I think control, because he isn't an automaton being puppeteered by Lews Therin like this kid is basically a puppet, is the way he describes it. And that's why he becomes a vegetable when
Yeah,
Nynaeve
but
finally heals
there's
him.
moments where because one part of his fight is losing control to lose there.
Yes.
So he does
Yes.
at some points become like when he blew up all the Trollocs in the manor house, he was an automaton of Lews Therin because he took
Hmm.
complete control. Now, that being said, we're talking about working with the power, which kind of closes the plot hole a little bit because now you can address both because it's on the realm of both.
Well, see, I don't know that it is a plot hole in the world or in the lore though, because again, um, to your point, Lu Lews Therin is a part of him. So it's like he had that metal rod through his head, and this part of his brain is still Rand, but there's this other part over here that's different, but he can somehow communicate with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and situationally, it can switch back and forth.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of the process of the two becoming one that he hasn't figured out completely yet, is how do I merge this and become whole? And we see glimpses of it, but he hasn't really thought it through. And in fact, at this point, he's kind of rejected it. And Lews Therin is separate. He's this guy I talk to in my head, and sometimes he gives me advice and helps me out. And leave me alone. Yes, I promise we can die, which is the end of this chapter. Is, yes, I promise we can die. Uh, or no, that was the end of his point of view was, and then we get to die. Yes, Lews Therin, shut up. Yes, we're going to die, and I'm looking forward to it too. Now let's get on with it. Um, but then, all right, so I kind of teased this in some of our other talking here, is you get a glimpse of this in the chapter, first from Cadsuane's point of view and then from Rand's point of view in chapter 31, um, about, guys, you're really not getting who he is, are you? It's there, but you haven't put all the pieces together. And then finally, because we're reaching the climax of the whole series, he just comes out and says it, which is, so starting down at the bottom of page 518. um oh, Rand, she said, turning away, this thing you have become, the heart without any emotion but anger, it will destroy you. Yes, he said softly. She looked back at him, shocked. I continue to wonder, he said, glancing down at me, why you all assume that I am too dense to see what you find so obvious. Yes, Nynaeve. Yes, this hardness will destroy me. I know. And the whole exchange is great. And again, if with two great performers and a cinematographer who knows how to manipulate light, this would be incredible to see brought to life. And then, you know, all the way to to kind of the end here on the bottom of 519, the exchange between them. You all claim that I have grown too hard, that I will inevitably shatter and break if I continue on. But you assume that there needs to be something left of me to continue on, that I need to climb back down the mountain once I've reached the top. That's the key, Nynaeve. I see it now. I will not live through this, and so I don't need to worry about what might happen to me after the last battle. I don't need to hold back, don't need to salvage anything of this beaten up soul of mine. I know that I must die. Those who wish for me to be softer, willing to bend, are those who cannot accept what will happen to me.
And again, I'm going to take beef with the you this thing you have become the heart without any emotion but anger. If it was anger, Grendel be dead.
Mhm,
Right here, right now, we would not
mhm.
be going to the meeting with the Shonjen.
I would
Anger is
find out what
predictable.
Nitram's Barrow means, and I would go there and I would melt it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There would be no anger is predictable. It's a feeling. It goes in the direction that provokes the anger. That's all it is. That's all it does. He has surpassed anger, and Sanderson can not get that through his thick skull.
Mhm,
He is in a point of just lacking feeling.
mhm. Um,
And some of the
and
words match that.
and she sees that when, this is the point where she looks at him looking down at Min and is thinking, oh crap, those eyes used to hold affection when they look down at Min, and now they hold nothing. So I don't know if this is Sanderson not getting it, or if Nynaeve isn't supposed to truly get it yet. She's almost there, but she hasn't fully grasped just how far gone Rand is, or why he's so far gone. It's not about the anger anymore, to your point.
Yeah, and if we had lacked that earlier, then another line would actually hit harder. If you go to 520, about halfway down, Rand just nodded. I do trust you, Nynaeve.
Mm-hmm.
As much as I trust anyone, more than I trust most. You think you know what is best for me, even against my wishes, but that is something I can accept. The difference between this is the line that would
Yep.
hit harder if it was not about emotion.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between you and Cadsuane is that you actually care about me. She only cares about my place in her plans, which is where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be Cadsuane right now, only caring about the place and the plan, about everybody around him. Because we get snippets of it from his own head, but then we get this continued monologue about, oh, you're just fury. You're just hatred. You're just all of these other things. No, because those are all useful things if harnessed correctly. He is nothing right now. He is the world bursting into the void, which is what the Dark One wants.
Well, but see, I think this is partially this exchange is partially to show that Rand isn't completely gone,
That's what I'm saying.
because
It would that's what that you actually said it better than I did. That part of this shows he's not completely gone because he could see it in someone else.
mhm,
Is that little creeping of humanity in, but you're trying to make him human and inhuman at the same time. So I think it just doesn't have the weight. I think Sanderson thinks it
yeah,
does,
yeah.
and I think kind of your casual reader might think that same thing, but those of us that
And,
overanalyze everything, it's
and the,
going.
the the reason this paragraph carries weight at all is because of the long history, the 11 books that Jordan wrote to give us this relationship between Rand and Nynaeve, so that when he says, you want me to live, for that you have my thanks. Dream on my behalf, Nynaeve, dream for things I no longer can. That has weight because of the previous 11 books, not necessarily because of the moment. Um, but but in the moment, I think the point of the dream on my behalf is what, like I said, Rand's not completely gone. The part of them that is the boy that used to laugh is still in there. But to your point about heroes that aren't perfect, I also think kind of part of the point here is that uh uh what Nynaeve's response to that is in her head, because as she thinks, the last sentence here is, for some reason she couldn't find words for the argument. She doesn't really know. She just instinctively gets that what you're saying sounds irrefutable, but my gut tells me that is wrong. I just can't figure out how to express that. And so that's going forward. That's what she's trying to figure out basically through the rest of this book is how do I explain to him? How do I articulate for myself what my gut feeling is, which is what you just said is wrong, even though I can't think of any words to refute.
Well, because, and again, something I don't think Sanderson gets, and I don't think a lot of modern writers get, but Nietzsche got. Evil isn't anger. We always attach evil to anger. We always put fire. Fire is evil. Anger, this revenge, this kind of vengeful spirit. Evil is not feeling. Anger is understandable. Jealousy is understandable. Fear is understandable. All of these things can have negative impacts to somebody around you, but they're not evil. Evil is the person who just doesn't care.
Yeah, don't make me get defying Hitler off the shelf there, but the
Well,
one of the last chapters
that's why we use him as an example of pure
I,
psychopathy.
exactly. And so one of the things Sebastian Hafner, one of the points he makes there in the book is that we lost early on Germany, the German people, we lost early on when we accepted the premise of the Jewish question, the Jewish problem, because by even entertaining that notion, we had essentially agreed to the Nazi premise that these aren't even people, these are subhumans. And that's to your point. So that's where the I referenced it for the Wannsee conference. That is how they can sew in this nice posh manner while having fancy dinner on fine china and silver. They can sew with such banality talk about the bureaucratic needs for solving this problem, solving this question, because they're just talking about widgets. They're not talking about people.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way, maybe close us out on this is there would be no fear of AI if this wasn't the correct answer. Because what is AI other than the ability to have the processes of human thinking without the processes of human emotion? That's exactly it. It's the paperclip thing. I'm designed to make paperclips. I run out of materials. I start bending dogs into paperclips. I run out of dogs. I start bending people into paperclips. That is the danger of AI because that's pure evil. It's the thought experiment of uh, end human suffering, and the AI decides war is human suffering, and without humans there is no war, so it kills all humans.
Yeah. It it's why there's in this fantasy setting that there is then a physical manifestation of that by those who are enlightened enough to see it, which is this patina, this aura of darkness that some are seeing or almost seeing. Like from Cadsuane's point of view, she sees it out of the corner of her eye, but then when she turns to look, she can't see anything. She just feels like it's almost there. But by the end of Nyneaves chapters, she is straight up seeing it
Mm-hmm.
when she looks right at him. And I'm wondering how much of that is that the darkness is getting stronger, and how much of that is RJ in his notes telling us Nynaeve gets it. She's the one who's closest to figuring this out because she's the one who can look right at it and see the darkness.
Well, we already know from book one, she can see the world for more than it is because she can read the
Mm,
weather.
mm. And the storm that is not a storm.
The
Yeah.
storm that is not a storm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, I didn't have any spoiler things to talk about. Um, you know,
Well, we're getting so close that
we're getting
this,
so close that it's
yeah.
yeah, as I have said a number of times these last few sessions is we'll get to it when we get to it because we're going to get to it here in a second.
Yeah, and even my Demandred semi could be a spoiler. That can wait because I mean it's such a
If you know, you know, and if
it's
you
a yeah if
don't,
you don't
it will
yeah
be there in a second.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, uh, next Wheel of Time, Matt chapter. So that actually might be short because we spent so much time ranting about him at the very beginning
Hmm.
that I don't know how much more there is to say here. Uh, and I think there's some Perrin after that. We finally get back to Perrin, um, which was teased here
Well, we
because
get we
Nynaeve
get we
asks
get Rand's
about.
meeting with the.
Oh yes, yes, yes. That I've kind of been in a hurry to get that because the way Tuan deals with that and the fact that it's from her point of view is another great example of this is an actual strong female character. You stupid modern woke writers, creative creators who don't know how to create. This is why, because you're much like Rand, you are stuck in binary thinking and it makes you boring and predictable. Um, and Tawan demonstrates we are shown why she is so strong, how she is so strong with how she deals with Rand in this meeting. So I've actually been looking. This is one of the few things I've really been looking forward to in this book because it's one of the more well written sections, and it is a great moment for Tawan to shine as a character.
Yeah, because what Jordan set up was she's super highly conscientious, which is the opposite of Matt,
Mm-hmm.
but she's super open
Mm.
and she is willing to adapt to the situation, which is unlike her predecessors.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, can't wait to get there, and then eventually we'll get to Perrin, and I don't know what to even think about that, but well,
I think
there's
it's
a
one
lot
of
of
those
that.
things which is where writers like Sanderson get in trouble is it sounds cool in your head and then you put it on paper and it's just not as cool as you thought.
Yeah, yeah. There's a big element of that. That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we will see y'all then.
All right. Later guys and like, share, subscribe, keep commenting, but we got to get those likes and views because if the comments outweigh the likes, then you're ratioed, which is a
Really?
bad thing. Yeah.
Hmm,
That,
okay.
that's a Twitter term where the people that quote tweet and comment outweigh the likes. That means that's a bad thing. That means you've been ratioed. So
Oh, well, does the algorithm care about that, or do we care about that? I don't know.
I don't know if the algorithm cares about that, but I guess any attention is good attention right now. So push us forward, and somehow we'll figure out
All
what
right.
we did with that one episode. I have no idea.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we'll figure it out by Wednesday.
Although it kind of cut it off a little bit, but I love the meme from the last time because it was the giving teaching Narishma to do balefire, and he says, "Isn't this illegal?" And he goes, "It's the least illegal thing I've done all day."
I just recently discovered a channel that my brother loves, and I yelled at him for why didn't you tell me sooner? Called the Fat Electrician, and he's one of his pieces of merch is a shirt that says, "It's not a war crime if it's the first time."
Oh, that we have the Nuremberg trials to show that informed consent is a big thing, even though it wasn't a thing,
Yeah, yeah.
and those guys got hanged. So, yeah, we have a statute of common sense that goes into that.
Or at least we should.
We
All right.
should, yeah.
Well, maybe that's what we'll talk about Wednesday. We'll see y'all then.
All right, later.